I'm Isaiah with IJC Writing, a place of fantasy, romance, and sometimes both. For all of my Twitter followers, this is my disclaimer. This is still not the video for the deities that I promise you. I promise after this video we will get into that. However, I just felt that this was important to go over before we get into that. And before we officially start the video, I would like everyone to go out and buy my paranormal romance. It is called Elixir of Feelings. You can find it at Amazon. I will put the link in the description below. Or if you would also like to, you can go to my website at IJC Writing. There you will find a link to it, a preview for the book as well. You will also find prompts and other short stories that I've created as well, just to give you a good sense of the world in which I write. Now that we have that out of the way, let's jump right into this. Okay, so basically, I told you guys there were two major things that you need to understand before I could get into the deities. That would be the resources, and then that would also be the races. Now, the races are a little special because they're broken up quite a bit. So let me just go ahead and start by saying, yes, I know that the gods are important, and you will notice that throughout the video, but we need to understand the races before we get into the gods and understand why what is what. So, when the creator created Drekenvold, he created two ruling classes. He created the gods and he created the dragons. Both of these races were capable of creating others. They are basically the ruling creations that he left in charge to manage Drekenvold. Let's start with the gods first. They created the 5 original humanoid races, this being humans, elves, dark elves, orcs, and halflings. So I think I may have added in my original video that the races in my world have real world counterparts. The humans are the Spanish and the Latino races. They populate what is the Western Hemisphere and the mainland, and they are pretty populous and pretty much like the same as humans here, except for all of them speak Spanish. Next we have the elves. The elves are actually South African, like Zimbabwe. They speak the language Hoja or Nosha. It's like 5 different ways to pronounce it online, and I don't have a native speaker with me to tell me exactly how it's pronounced. Just think the language of Black Panther, which is the most popular iteration that I've seen of it. That's what they are. And in my telling of the elves, they are far more powerful, far more fierce. They are very magical still, and some of the old stereotypes from most fantasies do still hold, but they no longer have the cocky arrogance. They still do live for thousands of years. They are still very tribal. Think mostly like the wood elves that you would see in most fantasy. Now the elves live in the mid-northern area, just south of the Kelsa Mountains, which is where the winged races live, but we'll get more to the winged races later. Next we have the dark elves, and if you stick around long enough you'll probably find that dark elves are my favorite fantasy race ever. And for these I gave them the American and the British cultures. There are a few who they do go to the surface to live. Now, this does not determine whether or not they're a surfacer or not. It's the ideologies behind it that actually make up this difference. Now, when it comes to the more traditional of the dark elves, this is the more British, the ones where the women are in charge. They're stronger, they're the warriors, and the clerics and men are pretty much just useless to them. Those are the British ones. But the ones that are different, where they take more society norms from the humans or the surfacers as they call them, they refer to themselves as dark elves as to separate themselves from the drow, which are the more British. Next we have the orcs, and what I gave them was the Chinese culture. I wanted to make them a lot more sophisticated, more intelligent, a lot more enlightened, and give them a brand new feel that most people don't ever give them. They still have the barbarian tendencies, and these are separated by Tuskers and Detuskers. The Tuskers being the traditional D&D ones, where they're more barbarians, nomads, things of that nature. Really wanted to kind of model them off of, you know, your Mongolians or Raiders or things like that. Or if for all of you Game of Thrones fans, we're thinking the Dothraki. I wanted to model them after that. There's still some semblance of culture. They're not just mindless beasts, but I did want to still give them their props because when most people think barbarians and raiders and things of that nature in fantasy, a lot of times they do think orcs. I did not want to take that from them. I just wanted to add to them and give them more depth. Now the orcs have their own country, which is on the eastern hemisphere, and they live in a place that is called Wonggua, which is Mandarin for kingdom. And lastly, of the original godly races, we have the halflings. Now, If anyone's been following me for a while, they may have noticed that I've written a couple of stories on most of the races that I create. However, there has not been one with Halfling. And Halfling, in this case, in my world, also does include the Dwarf races. Now, the reason why you don't see them very often is because, spoiler alert, they're dead. They're absolutely gone. Now, they start out in the beginning, but they do end up getting into a very, very deadly war that ends up wiping them out with somebody later on, and I'll leave that as kind of a little, bonus for later. Next, we're going to get into the Guardian races for the gods. The Guardian races for the gods I want to start with is the Lycans, because the angels and vampires become a little bit more complex, but Lycans are a little bit easier to talk about. So the Lycans were originally shapeshifters. They were shapeshifters as they were originally meant to be the guardians of the homeland of the gods, which is Lyonesse, which is a floating island where all the gods reside. However, the Lycans did get caught up in a war with the angels and the vampires, and those three races did get cursed, and their curse was that they lost their ability to shapeshift, where they were stuck with only their Lycan form. And for the culture that I gave them the Japanese culture. It just made sense with the pack mentality, the following the strongest of the rulers, and things of that nature. But I did want to give them some kind of culture as well. The Lycans live on the Eastern Hemisphere with the Orcs, but they have their own country as well, and it is called Hunimpu. Now, for the angels, I'll start with them. They are the protectors of the 5 original races during the day. They are winged creatures, they're guardians, protectors, and much like you hear in a lot of the D&D lore and fantasy and pretty much every form of media you can find. They're not the ones that's so much as complex as it is the vampires, because this is the one I get questions on the most when it comes to vampires. But for the culture of the angels, I ended up giving them Italian, basically because I wanted to give them the Roman Empire feel, the, shield and gladius or spear and, basically protectors. And this is how they were in the original days, but now towards where the stories usually take off at, this is long past their days, but they still hold some semblance of their former glory. The angels have their own curse as well. Their curse, however, is that of battle lust. If they do not get a chance to fight or let off aggression, their body actually tenses up and causes them pain. This was also removed after the War of the Dragons. Now for the vampires, I did want to keep with the theme of their bloodlust and things like that, but we'll get into that. The vampires were originally created as a cousin, if you will, to the angels. They were the guardians and protectors at night of Drekenvold. So they pretty much have all the same powers as the angels do. However, they're more magic oriented, whereas the angels are more physically oriented. Now, I gave them the French culture. No particular reason, just I like French culture. And, back in the French War Legion times, they were formidable to be, as duelists and things of that nature. So, when the War of the Fallen happened, this is when they gained their curse, and this is where their bloodlust comes from. This is where, all of this happens, because they were pretty much the main cause of it. But when I get into lore later, I'll dive more into this. Now we move on to the dragons. Now the dragons won't be as difficult because they don't create as much. Well, they do, but they're not really too important. I mean, I don't want to give the wrong idea that the dragons are evil or whatever the case may be. It's just that I typically tend to focus more on the races created by the gods. Maybe that'll change in the future. However, as it stands right now, I mostly focus on the creatures created by the gods. The dragons, however, they created the monster races. All your beast of, D&D lore, not your spirits, those are created by spirit magic, which I talked about in my previous video, but I'm more referring to, the goblins, the ogres, the cyclopses, all of those. Those type of monsters, those were created by the dragons. They were there to basically keep the population of the humanoid races under control, because the gods and the dragons understood that too much of one or the other would create an unbalance, and seeing as how they don't create every single one of them and they have the ability to reproduce, something had to be put in balance to keep these in check. However, there is one race that is worth mentioning that comes from the dragons, and if you follow me, if you've heard of Eros Nagarin, you know about his race, and this is one of the ones I really want to talk about. This is the Talon race. The Talon race is a race of humanoids that were pretty much worshippers of the dragons. Even though they were created by the gods, they saw the dragons as more powerful and wanted to follow their wisdom. So they went to the dragons and became servants of them. And to be rewarded for their servitude, they were given the powers of dragons. This is identifiable by their eyes. They basically have the eyes of dragons. Other than that, they are completely humanoid. So, with this, they have different elements, whether it be fire, water, light, whatever the case may be. They take on these forms, they take on this power that they have, and they can even, for a short while, have a humanoid dragon form that they can transform into. Once Talons reach puberty, they are able to do this, all except with the one exception being Eros, which is talked about in the book, and I don't want to spoil that because I'm going to be re-releasing it soon. There is no official land of the Talons in most parts of it, but then whenever they do unify and become one nation, they still just particularly call it the Southern Coast. Now the Talons is the last race that lives on the Western Hemisphere. They live south of where the Elves do, separated by a good miles of plain on the Southern Coast. The Talons have a culture that is akin to the dragons, much like the gods are ancient Egyptian, which I did not mention earlier, but the gods are of different varying cultures based off of the races that they most attach themselves to, but that will be spoken about later when I do make my video about the gods. The dragons, however, are the ancient Egyptians, making the Talons more modernized Egyptian or the Arab world. What I did with this one was I pretty much kept the traditional Islam religion alive in my world, except that instead of Allah, it would be the dragons that they're worshipping in various dragons in various forms. But this is the culture that I did decide to give the Talons. Now what's really important is I wanted to note that I did not want to single out any one culture or one race when I was making these determinations of what race was going to have what cultures. As a matter of fact, I wanted to highlight each one of these. I only had so many languages or so many races to work with so many languages, so I just wanted to do it this way. And even the gods and dragons themselves, there's no one good or evil. If you follow me for a while, or if I do get a chance to write all the stories that I want to write, you'll notice in my writing that there are dragons who are good, there are dragons who are bad, there are gods that are good, there are gods that are bad. And all of this just shows that everyone is pretty much even when it comes to morality, and it's pretty much just their societal differences that make up these, choices. So that's what I really wanted to highlight. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of the races that I've created in Drekenvold. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. If you like this video, like it, share it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all of the things, so that whenever I make videos, which I have determined I will start doing on Thursdays, thank goodness, because it was getting really frantic with deciding when I was going to make a video, what I was going to make a video about, how to do this, how to do that. But as I am a new indie writer, I'm trying to, find my way. And what I've decided is that Thursdays will be the days that I will create YouTube videos. Now, I will continue to make videos like this where I will talk about the lore. But what I will also try to do is, as I go along, I'll try to share what I've learned and my tips and tricks of writing as I've come along, because I want to help out everybody. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll be watching videos from other people gaining knowledge as I do, and I want to pass on that knowledge to anyone who may come across my channel and who may just need a little bit of help. Who knows, I may see something that you haven't seen and it can help out. Everybody wins. Now, as I stated in the beginning, I do want you to go over to Amazon, check out my book, Elixir of Feelings. So far it has all 5 stars. I mean, maybe you guys can up the 5 stars, or maybe you'll enjoy it. Again, I'll put the link in the description below. I do have my website. I try to post prompts daily, so that they're, just give you something to read, give you a reason to go to the site. So just know that I am trying to do that. I am also working on a cop series called LMPD Chronicles, which follows into the newer age. I'll talk about the ages and eras of Drekenvold as I go along, and it's just basically a nice little cop series that you will follow. I do plan on making more weekly content, premium content eventually, but as of right now, everything except for Elixir of Feelings on my site is free for you to read. I would love any of your feedback. If you want to go over to there, read something, know that I will be moving things around a lot because the priority of stories do change. So, like I said before, go ahead, like, comment, share. Please comment. You cannot hurt my feelings. I assure you, you cannot. So, again, I've been Isaiah with IJC Writing, a place of fantasy, romance, and sometimes both. And I will see you next Thursday.